There's a river somewhere that's called Jordan, and they say that it's steep and wide, and they say that the king and the beggar on that shore will stand side by side at the crossing of the Jordan. Why should I be afraid? There'll be someone there who loves me to guide me across the river to endless shores above. Though the river be dark and stormy, it will pass like a dream in the night, and my soul will awake in the morning in regions of endless daylight. Oh, at the crossing of the Jordan, why should I be afraid? There'll be someone there who loves me to guide me across the river to endless shores above.
Well, this brings to close an era and a relationship that defies description. We all know that the aunt and the uncle relationship many times can be very special, but this went beyond that. This went beyond the normal. Lou and Rosella were beyond just aunts. They were great aunts. And they were great, great aunts. And every generation, it just got greater. And I marvel at how the children enjoyed being in the presence of these great, great aunts. And for many of you, you have known Aunt Rosella all your life. You can never remember a day that there was not an Aunt Rosella. You remember her. I first became acquainted with Lou and Rosella in March of 1961. I was saved in a Wednesday night service, and I visited the church where they were a member the following Sunday evening. I was 13, and Rosella was 41 at that time. Now think about that for just a moment. At that time, it was not very significant that she was 28 years older than I. But when I turned 70, that became pretty impressive that she was 28 years older than I. I do not know many people who are 28 years older than I am. As a matter of fact, I don't know anyone who's 28 years older than I am. That Sunday evening in 1961, I had no way of knowing how this lady would impact and influence my life. And though they haven't occupied those rooms in over 3 years, there are 2 bedrooms in our house that are called Louie's room and Rosella's room. They're a vital part of all of our lives. I want to call your attention very briefly to a statement in the Word of God that I believe is an accurate description of Rosella Biddle. Some of you may recall that I read this same verse 3 years ago at Aunt Louie's funeral, but it's so applicable to both of those ladies. As a matter of fact, it was never Louie or Rosella. It was always Louie and Rosella. You didn't go to Louie's house, or you didn't go to Rosella's house. You went to Louie and Rosella's house. You didn't have dinner with Louie or dinner with Rosella. You had dinner with Louie and Rosella. So it's so appropriate that the same verse fits both. In Acts chapter 9 and verse 36, the Bible said, "Now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds which she did." There are 2 things in that verse said about this woman, Dorcas, which reminds me of Aunt Rosella. Number 1, she was a devoted disciple. Now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. She's known as the disciple, a follower of Christ. In fact, she's the only woman in the New Testament explicitly identified as the disciple. That's pretty amazing when you think that this title was not given to Mary or Martha or Priscilla or really to any other woman in the New Testament. She's the only woman identified as the disciple. She stood out as a very faithful follower of Christ. Without any reservation or hesitation, I can say this afternoon that Rosella Biddle was a faithful follower of Christ. She loved the Lord. She loved the church. She was faithful to the church. She supported the church with her attendance, her tithes, her prayers. She loved the Word of God. Her Bible is filled with notes that are absolutely immaculate. They beat any Bible notes that I've ever seen, period. She taught Sunday school for many years. She was a witness for Christ. She was a soul winner. She was a faithful disciple, a dedicated disciple. Secondly, she was a doer of deeds. The verse says this woman was full of good works. Isn't that a marvelous thing to say about someone? She was full of good works and alms deeds, which she did. Now, we have no record of her words, but we know about her works. Rosella Biddle knew what it was to work hard. She understood hard work. As a matter of fact, she worked hard all her life. And that often caused some problems at the Peerless where she worked in Rossville because of her competitive attitude. And she did have a competitive spirit. And her determination to do a good job. They would often give her more difficult work to slow her down a little bit, make production possible for the other ladies. And that hurt her feelings. She would come home with her feelings hurt because she was just trying to do a good job. Well, she was a perfectionist. I call it the Biddle spirit. But Dr. Oford used to say, where there's no heart, there's no art. And she put her heart in everything she did, whether it was making a garden or making cornbread, making a cake or making a dress. She was a perfectionist. She did her very best. Verse 39 says, the widows show Simon Peter the coats and garments which Dorcas made. Aunt Rosella was a professional seamstress. If you saw Phyllis's post on Facebook this morning, you saw that. She made many of Phyllis and Loretta's dresses when they were young. The first time I saw Loretta, she was wearing a dress that Aunt Rosella had made. Wonder if that had anything to do with the outcome of that meeting. And speaking of good works, she made her niece's husband an Italian cream cake on a regular basis that was just better than anything you've ever tasted in your life. She's going to be missed. She's going to be missed. Well, as I said a moment ago, it's never easy. Even though you know it's best for the one departing, it's never easy. And you would think as often as I've stood like I'm standing now, that it would become routine or be easy. But it's never easy to say goodbye. It's never easy. But for the child of God, we never say goodbye for the last time. There's always a meeting place. Please allow me just a moment and commend Loretta. For over 3 years, except the times we were out of town, she spent several hours every day at the nursing home. This past Tuesday, she spent all day and that night at the nursing home. About 4 a.m. Wednesday morning, she just felt that she should turn the radio on. She turned the radio on with the volume down low, and the most amazing thing happened. When she turned the radio on, they were singing Precious Memories. And as she held Rosella's hand, and the Precious Memories song was playing in the background, Aunt Rosella just took her last breath and went to heaven. And there was someone there who loved her on both sides of the river. When Loretta let go of her hand here, Jesus said, I'm here, Rosella. And he took her hand and he let her in. We look at death so different, don't we? We look at death so different than they do in heaven. I close my part with the words of Henry Scott Holland. Holland said, I'm standing on the seashore. A ship spreads its white wings and sails for the morning breeze and starts for the ocean. I stand watching her until she fades on the horizon. And someone at my side says, she's gone. Gone? Gone where? The loss of sight is in me, not in her. Just at the moment when someone says, she's gone, others are saying, she's coming. When we say, she's gone, others say, here she comes. Memories are a precious blessing from the Lord. And I, like so many of you, have some precious memories. Don't let go of them, but hang on to them. And may God bless her memory.
Philippians 1 says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. So today we wanted to celebrate Rosella a little bit, and I don't know why they picked us too, but they did. So here we go. Rosella was born in 1920. She had 2 brothers and how many sisters? Six. A few years ago, I sat down with Louis and Rosella, and Louis couldn't remember, but Rosella immediately recalled who was the president of the United States when she was born. It was Woodrow Wilson. She was saved as a teenager, and if you hear Louis's name mentioned here, it's because they did everything together.
What I know about heaven makes me want to go. What I don't know about heaven makes me want to go. But you know, our finite minds really can't comprehend what it's like. So we think of what we're familiar with. And I can just imagine early Wednesday morning about 4 a.m. as Rosella stepped into the Jordan, as Daddy said, someone was there who loved her to take her hand, and she met her loving Savior. I can just imagine she looked at the other side, and I can just hear her say, "Louis?" And I can just hear Louis saying, "Rosella, is that you?" Now, it probably did not happen like that, but what I do believe is that she did meet her Lord and Savior. And Louis was there, and Milford, and Ozell, and Gordon, and Nora, and Margie, and Hazel, and Mildred, and Clifford, and Harold, and Johnny, and Aunt Pearl, Uncle Gordon, or Uncle George, I'm sorry, and Miss Nally. There were friends there to greet her and loved ones to meet her on the streets of that city. And again in my mind, I can just hear her say, "You mean I'm here in heaven already? Aw, you mean it?" And by now, I am sure she has asked the angels if they know a 4-note song. And of course they don't. But I can just imagine that she's teaching them. So, lo, fa, 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 la, so, fa, la, 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 so, fa, la, so, fa, mi, la, so, fa, la, so, fa, la, so, fa. And the angels are probably looking at her like y'all are looking at me right now. But Rosella taught me that. And she loved singing. She had a beautiful alto voice. She loved pretty things. And I can only imagine what she thinks about the splendor and the grandeur of heaven.
I'm embarrassed that she did that, but Rosella would be very proud. Rosella had many friends. I've seen Kim and I many times. We've been out to eat and been out in public, and someone would always stop them and say a kind word. They were oblivious in public, but someone would stop them and say a kind word, say hello to them, and we noticed that. I've seen phone repairmen, neighbors, plumbers, contractors, kids selling the Grit newspaper, all leave with a cake made by Rosella. They would come to the door, but they would leave with a cake made by Rosella. She wasn't concerned whether you were hungry or not. She wanted you to have it. It truly was a talent God had given her, and she used it to give to others. I recall one time, Jeff, he brought a group of teenagers with him to Lynn Rosella's house. Now, you're cool if you're at 70 and your nephews are bringing teenagers to your house. And they still talk to this day. In fact, someone just mentioned it the other day to me. They talked how stuffed they were when they left. They had made everything in the kitchen and everything they could find at a grocery store. One of them actually had to unbutton his pants before he left. And we reminded him, at Lou and Rosella's house, you have to pace yourself, okay? Because the first cake you saw was not the cake. It was just the first one they were bringing out.
As I said, Rosella loved pretty things. She loved porcelain dolls, but they were just to look at. Now, if Louie had had porcelain dolls, I could have played in the mud with them, but not Rosella. She was not going to have it. And she respected her things, and she took care of them. And she expected me and Jason to take care of them as well. She loved diamonds and pretty jewelry. She and Louie could both dress up and look like $1 million, but Rosella's height gave her an edge. She could always look so elegant. Louie's clothes, even her nice church clothes, were usually stained with cooking grease, and she'd wear them till they were threadbare. But now Rosella's matching dress, it always outlived Louie's. Rosella was a smart lady. As Daddy said, she was very talented. She just had that intuitive Biddle know-how. She could do just about anything that she set her mind to do. And as Dad mentioned, she was a skillful seamstress and a wonderful baker, not only of delicious cakes, but beautiful cakes. And she was the only person I ever have known, to my knowledge and my memory, who actually used the dining room hutch. Everybody else just put their pretty china in it, but you would go to Rosella's and Louie's house, and there was always a cake or two sitting in the hutch waiting for dessert. It seems like there were always those pretty little icing rosettes cooling in the refrigerator, and of course Jason and I always wanted to eat them, but she wasn't going to have it. But now Louie, if Rosella wasn't around, Louie would always let you have just one.
I'd say there's very few people in the world that can say this, but Rosella truly, truly loved her family. And very few people can say that they touched 4 generations of people. There's very few people can say that, but Rosella and Louie can. As my children came along, I marveled. I said, and I marveled that Lou and Rosella would sit on the floor and put the same amount of love and effort that they did with me, Kim and Jeff and all the other grandkids and nephews and nieces here. I don't believe they ever truly got over Gordon's death, their brother. They talked about it a lot. And I think because of that, they made certain that they stayed close to their other siblings. Many times we would be interrupted to go to Aunt Mildred's house or to Nora's or a host of other homes. And they always enjoyed Hazel's visits from Atlanta. They would talk about their family constantly. She would. A special thank you has to be said to Loretta for her endless and untiring hours. And that's already been said, so I'm going to repeat that just to say that you made her last days very special. And Mom brought them from South Carolina, and they loved it and they had a great time. But Rosella liked to sing. And so for the last 3 years, you spent a lot of time singing with her, and I know that she enjoyed that. I know she loved it. My mom and dad were very fortunate when we were growing up because they had built-in babysitters. They probably felt bad to drop us off, but what they didn't know was Kim and I and Jeff could do anything there. It didn't matter what it was. So before I was 10, I've climbed on roofs at Lou and Rosella's house. I've repaired electrical items. I don't know if they really knew that I did that. I learned to cook, and at 9, I drove the Buick Skylark to the Dream Cream with me in the driver's seat and Rosella in the passenger seat. She made me stop and wait till she went in the house to get her driver's license, as if that would keep us both out of jail. One of my fondest memories is being able to go to their house for several weeks with my dad and Jim to remodel the inside of their house. Rosella went and bought a jigsaw from Kmart. It was worthless to the project, okay? They never used it. They just smiled and nodded and put it over to the side. But she gave it to me one day, saying I might need it. I still have that to this day in my utility room, and I cherish those memories. I don't remember the exact words, but I do remember standing in the living room and Jim or my dad saying, I remember this vividly as if it was yesterday, saying, if we don't get out of here, they're going to kill us. I think they ate more than they worked. Years later, I would mow their yard for them unannounced. I would pull up, and within minutes, Rosella was taking her spot. Her post, she was the supervisor, because that's what she did. She would sit in the front when I mowed the front and then move to the back porch when I moved to the back. They loved me coming. They loved their family. Both of them did.
She also loved gardening. While Louie grew flowers, Rosella grew beautiful gardens, and she loved to show off her tomato and okra plants. She was a strong lady. She didn't hug you gently. She squeezed you tight. And she was very competitive, as Daddy said, and she loved to pester. And that just fueled Jeff, Jason, and me, because we like to pester right back. And nothing was funnier than sitting in the back seat of that Buick Skylark, riding down the road for miles, Rosella driving, of course, with the blinker on. I don't know why it was so funny, but we would be in the back seat laughing, and she was trying to figure out what we were laughing at. And Louie was just hollering, Rosella, just watch the road, watch the road. She was always a willing singer at the many funerals and church services that Jason and I conducted in their living room. But she wasn't very cooperative otherwise. Louie was always a willing mourner or a sinner, but Rosella, on the other hand, she mourned too loudly, and she would not get saved. And I could just still hear that rich, loud laugh when we'd get frustrated and kick her out of the service. I can also hear that loud, rich snoring that terrorized me as a child. But it's funny how in recent months it became something to cherish. As she began to struggle with confusion and some agitation, and she couldn't sleep, and you would just long to hear her snoring again. When Louie went to heaven almost 3 years ago, we really didn't think Rosella would make it this long without her. And these past 3 years in the nursing home weren't easy for her. But we are thankful for some staff members and some nurses there who took an interest in her and watched out for her and cared for her. As Jason said, we were talking earlier about how Phyllis moved them to South Carolina when Louie was 90 years old. That type of move would kill most 90-year-olds, but they survived there 6 years and thrived until just the end. And there are 2 nurses who have driven down from South Carolina today to be here, who were part of the team that took care of them in their home when they were still living there. And I appreciate your care of her and for coming today. What just an honor that is to Rosella that you're here. So thank you very much. And I appreciate Phyllis for those years. It wasn't easy. They had a little more fun then than we had in the nursing home, but it was still very busy and time consuming. And I appreciate her care. I too want to say that I appreciate my mother for her care. And dedication to Rosella. She made it her personal mission to make sure that she was well-dressed and that her hair was combed and teased every day. And when Rosella reached the point where she no longer needed to take care of herself and to care how she looked, Mom never forgot that it had once mattered very much to her. And so she took excellent care of her, and I'm very appreciative of that. And what as Dad said, was with her right to the end. And that means so much to know that she wasn't alone on this side of the Jordan as she made that crossing.
Lastly and quickly, Rosella was unashamed of her faith. She loved Jesus, and she wasn't afraid to share that. All of the Biddles love music, and you could pull out an old hymn book and start singing, and something inside Rosella's radar went up. She tuned quickly to that frequency. But when Brendan was small, he would have Lou and Rosella sit down in the living room and sing with them. The problem was his attention span was very short. Okay, and by the half of the first stanza, he decided he wanted to switch songs, that was not the correct song. Didn't matter to Rosella. It bothered Louie, but didn't matter to Rosella. She would just switch songs and keep singing just as loudly as she did before.
We sang an old hymn at church Wednesday evening, and it seemed so fitting in light of Rosella's recent struggles. She couldn't get comfortable there in the end, and if she was in the bed, she wanted to be in the recliner. If she was in the recliner, she wanted to be in the bed, and at times she would say, "You just got to get me out of here. You got to get me out of here." And we sang the whole song of how beautiful heaven must be, but the second verse just seemed so fitting. In heaven, no drooping or pining, no wishing for elsewhere to be. God's light is forever there shining. How beautiful heaven must be. Sweet home of the happy and free. Fair haven of rest for the weary. How beautiful heaven must be.
When my papa died, I had the unfortunate task of going with my mom and Sherry, and I believe Kim was there, to tell Lou and Rosella. It was such a shock that I don't think really Louie even comprehended. But when we walked in the door, Rosella, the minute we walked in the door, and we'd been there many, many times, she said, "What's wrong?" When we told her, she kept crying, and she said, "Oh, no, oh, no." That's all she would say, just over and over, "Oh, no." When I got the text that Rosella died, my first thought was her cries of "oh, no" had just turned to "oh, yes." Oh, yes. What a happy day that'll be. What a glorious jubilee. And all of heaven will be there. What a meeting in the air.
come a day, I know without a doubt, around the throne the saints will bow and lay down every crown. Glorious that moment, to see him face to face, to hear him say, well done, my child, you finished your race.
But for now the sun's still rising, there's work to still be done, while we're waiting for the promise of what is yet to come. Finish well every day that we are given. Finish well for the glory of his name. Finish strong until the Savior finally calls us home. Give it everything we have. Finish well. There's no truth in saying we've seen our better days. These are the days to be courageous, bold and full of faith. So wherever he may lead us, whatever it may cost, let the church arise and lift the banner of the cross. Finish well every day that we are given. Finish well for the glory of his name. Finish strong until the Savior finally calls us home. Give it everything we have. Finish well every day that we are given. Finish well for the glory of his name. Finish well. Finish well.
Finish well. It's a noble concept, but how does one do it? You go to the bookshelf of eternity and you peruse the books that have been written by great men and women throughout the centuries. And one book seems to stick out. It just commends itself to your attention, like we often find ourselves doing as we look in a bookstore or maybe a library. The title is not a term that really rings a bell with us. It's a little unusual term, but the unstated subtitle of this particular book certainly fits the question at hand. It would seem that that unstated title is How to Finish Well. So we pick up the book off the bookshelf of eternity and we peruse the flyleaf of it and we discover that the author of this particular book is very well qualified to write on this subject. If ever there's been a person who had the capability of telling us how to finish well, this person seems to have the answer. We flip over to the back cover of the book and we find that it's been endorsed by God. So maybe we ought to read it if we want to know how to finish well. We come with great expectations because we have thoughts of business, we have thoughts of career, we have thoughts of success. We want to finish at the top. So we settle in our easy chair and we open the book and we read the words of the preacher. And we lay the book down and we say, it's not what I wanted. I didn't want the preacher. I wanted a great leader. I wanted a successful businessman. I wanted to hear from an economist. I wanted to know how to make money. I wanted to know how to do well. But this writer does not ascend the throne to speak as a king, to speak as a real estate developer, a business leader, or a philosopher, though he excelled at all. He comes before us today to speak to us behind the sacred desk as the preacher. So we pick up the book again. And in the language of a poet, with the wisdom of a genius, the knowledge of a scholar, the experience of a Renaissance man, and the stamp of approval of God, Solomon writes to us. Solomon tells us a little bit about life. He tells us how to finish well. But what we learn from Solomon is really not probably what we expected to learn. We expected keys to financial success, tools to be a good salesperson, ways to build better and stronger relationships, ideas for how to grow a successful business. But Solomon hits us right between the eyes when he speaks to us about the direction of life. And the first lesson he teaches us is that life is probably not headed in the direction we're expecting it to go. In the last chapter of his book on how to finish well, he says you're going to get old. Your eyes are going to dim. And with beautiful language, he talks about the keepers of the house trembling. And so many of us know that feeling. The strong men shall bow themselves, begin to stoop. The grinders cease because we're losing a few teeth. Those that look out the windows be darkened. The eyes begin to dim. The doors are shut in the street. The hearing is gone. We don't seem to hear like we once did. And yet, as deaf as we are, the subtlest little sound awakens us in the deep of night. Most of us would say it's not fun getting old. And yet Solomon says to us, if you want to finish well, you need to understand that life's not going to end the way you think it is. You're going to get old. The direction of life is not headed where you think it is when you're young. As I came into town last night, we came through the mountains, so we came a way that I don't typically come. We came through Cleveland, and as we passed by East Brainerd Road, I couldn't help but turn and look up to the right, a road that I had traveled so many times as a kid. With Kim sitting in the car beside me, never said a word to her, but I thought when I used to ride those roads, I never dreamed that I would be back here with a wife from South Carolina. And then it hit me. Your kids are riding these roads, boy. You're not so young anymore. And believe it or not, we're all getting older. And I find myself, I still think I'm that little boy going on Sunday afternoon to the Krispy Kreme before church on Sunday evening. Just that little kid. That's who I am standing here today. But you look at me and you go, oh, no, you're not. You ate a little too many Krispy Kremes along the way. But that's who I feel like I am. Life is not headed in the direction that I thought it was when I sat at the counter of Krispy Kreme. We're getting old. He not only speaks to us about the direction of life, but he reminds us about the disappointments in life, and he teaches us a lesson that life isn't probably all you think it's going to be. Because you see, we have great plans for our life, and even though we may come to the realization we're going to get old, we plan for that day. We plan for that moment of retirement. We're going to be successful. We're going to do well. Life is going to be great. And Solomon, in verse number 8 of this last chapter of his book on how to finish well, tells us, after telling us how wealthy he was, after telling us all that he possessed, after telling us that he searched out all wisdom that could be searched out, after reading his biography and understanding that literally people traveled the known world of his day just to sit at his feet and to hear him tell them something they didn't know, that man says, life isn't just vanity. It isn't just empty. It's vanity of vanities. It's emptiness of emptiness. Life isn't really what we expect. He pursued meaning in life. He he overturned every rock under which he thought he could find a moment of pleasure. Solomon got to the end of his life and he said, it's empty. It's empty. Ravi Zacharias said, we pity the man at the garbage dump because of his impoverishment is stark and his disfigurement is visible. But then he says we sit in front of our television screens or in movie theaters or thumb through our fashion magazines, eyeing symbols of beauty and success, the icons of our time, and we do not see the scavenging that goes on within them, the searching through every success to find something of transcending worth, the plastic smiles, the contoured shapes, the schizoid hungers for privacy and recognition at the same time. The problem with life, Ravi Zacharias said, is not that a man ends up burrowing through the garbage looking for something to fill his stomach. The problem with life is that no matter what we've achieved or what we've attained, we still find ourselves burrowing deep within, trying to assuage the hungers of our soul. And he quotes G.K. Chesterton, who said that weariness does not come from being weary of pain, but weariness comes from being weary of pleasure. And this afternoon, we would sit here and we would pity the person who sits on the street begging. We pity for the one who scrounges through the garbage, and we say, oh, how pitiful that is. And yet, I wonder if sitting here today, there aren't people who are burrowing deep within their souls, saying, I have the plastic smile. I've attained a measure of wealth, but I'm not happy. I'm empty. And we meet people every day who find themselves right in that place. And pleasure, pain, and sorrow is not being weary with pain. It's being weary with the pleasure that we've sought after that leaves us so empty. Solomon teaches us one final truth when he speaks about the duty in life. And in the last words of his book on how to finish well, Solomon reminds us and teaches us a lesson that the most important thing in life might just be something that you're not focusing on. I did a funeral for a lady in our church, a friend of Lou and Rosella's. Kim and I did, at her bedside just not long after she passed away. Her brother was there, an older gentleman himself in his own right. He walked up to her bedside. She'd only been passed away for a very short period of time. He put his hands on the side of that hospital bed that was there in her home, and he leaned over and he looked at his sister. And I guess I'm kind of a sentimental kind of guy, so I always, the antennas go up and I'm really focused. And I was watching him. And he leaned over and he said, she's not there. That's just where she used to live. And he walked away. And you know, Solomon tells us that. That's just where she used to live. And all of us here today are just living here temporarily. This is just where one day it will be said, this is where we used to live. We're going to our long home, as he called it. So what is important and how do we finish well? He tells us two things. Fear God and keep his commandments. The man who achieved arguably the most wealth that's ever been achieved in all the world. Maybe he's not the greatest king who's ever lived. That, you might argue, was his father. But certainly he ranks up there. There's probably never been a wiser man who's ever lived than Solomon. And Solomon says, so what's the conclusion? Fear God and keep his commandments. And then he reminds us why this is so important. For God shall bring every work into judgment. That's why it's important for us to live life with the end in view. Because you see, where we think life is heading when we're young and maybe naive, we soon begin to realize the things that others know. We get shaky, our limbs begin to tremble, our sight begins to dim. We're not as strong as we once were. Life proves to be disappointing. We had grand plans, and it didn't work out that way. And we had great dreams, and it seems that despite achieving the dreams, we're left empty. That is apart from God. Fear God and keep his commandments, because 30 seconds after death, we are looking. God, it's wonderful to see, I shall know him, I shall know him. But the question is, what is he going to say about us? Fear God and keep his commandments. When I heard they were going to sing that song, I, to my knowledge, had never heard that song before. And I listened to it. And I thought of Rosella, finish well. You know, Rosella was not the perfect picture of Christianity. None of us are. As Jason and Kim were discussing what they were going to share this morning, I said, are y'all going to tell them that story about when you locked her out of the car in that blistering rainstorm? And Jason said, I thought about it, but she didn't act too much like Jesus. And you know, I don't suppose I was acting too much like Jesus either, because while I kept telling him to unlock the door, I didn't do anything to help. It was kind of funny. But you know, what I remember of Rosella is that at church, when they were able to come to my church, they finally had to start finding the Bible passage that I was going to preach on before the service began. Because if they didn't, my whole message you heard so much that I wanted to say, just stop, I'll tell you. Just I'll talk to you. You know, you're going to miss it. Somebody stop her. So, you know, we started putting on the screen before the service what my message title would be and what the sermon text would be. And they would, before service, they would find it. She'd open her Bible, she'd have it marked, and she'd go right to it. She wanted to know the text. Same thing with the songbook. She'd miss the song trying to find it. So you just find it, hand her the book, she's going to sing. But I wonder how many of us, it doesn't matter if it's on the screen, if you have to swish through your iPhone, your iPad, whatever the case may be. Do you care that much about the text? Do you care that much about the words of the song? Do you care that much about singing those songs that's what means the world to you? You know, she wasn't a perfect specimen of a Christian, but she finished well. She finished well. And my challenge to us today, Jimmy Ward said it on Facebook, I believe. Someone shared this with me. I personally didn't see it. It's the last of the Biddles. I was talking to Scott. The generations are starting to spread. We'll probably never be again together like this, exactly. But will we finish well? We may look at them and say, well, they were just old and they were from a generation ago and they did those things because that's the generation they grew up in and they didn't learn any better. Careful. Make sure it wasn't a love for God and a desire to be pleasing to Him. And let's, in the generations that are to come, let's finish well. Father, I want to finish well. We thank you for the memory of Rosella. How, as it's been spoken today, she loved you. And I recognize that here in this audience today are a number of people who cherish that heritage that we have. But Lord, would you help us to finish well? Cherishing a heritage is not enough. Simply looking back over our past and even being thankful is not enough. But we must look to the future. We must look to the last of our days. And as Papa said, we're really not prepared to live until we're ready to die. And so, Lord, would this moment be a moment when we once again reassess whether we're ready to die so that we might be prepared to live. Rosella would be so proud of the accomplishments of all their nieces and nephews. But she would be most proud to know that they finished well. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Before we dismiss, I want to take just a moment myself. I said this privately with the family, but I want to say it publicly. How grateful I am and my family is for what Jim and Loretta have done in these last years when, quite frankly, we couldn't. We brought Lou and Rosella to our house, and I realized almost before the furniture was unloaded that this was not going to work. It was just more than we could handle. And Loretta on the phone said, "Bring them to my house." Loretta, I probably wasn't too much like Jesus. I said, "I'm going to get the U-Haul truck. I'm going right now. You tell her just hang on. Hang on. She doesn't say it now. No backing out. I'm coming." And we talked about it, and that was what needed to happen. And I know it was difficult for them even in the house. I said a moment ago that Jim's probably grateful that his cochlear would turn off the noise. But seriously, we are eternally grateful for what you've done and for making her those final days of her so very special and treating her so well and seeing that she was cared for. And I also want to thank Kim, because I know Kim put everything that her medical training and medical science would allow her to do, and I know she probably feels that she wishes she could do just a little bit more, but there comes a point in time which you can't do anymore. And so, Kim, we are grateful. We know you did everything you could do. We know there was nothing else you could do, and we thank you for doing that. There's coming a day where no sorrow will ever come, no more clouds in the skies, no more tears to dim the eyes. Forever we shall be on that happy golden shore. What a day, glorious day that will be.
Let's sing that song, "There's Coming a Day." Let's stand as we sing. There is coming a day when no heartache shall come, no more clouds in the sky, no more tears to dim the eye. All is peace forevermore on that happy golden shore. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see. And I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace. When he takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be. There'll be no sorrows there, and no burdens to bear, no more sickness or pain, no more parting over there, and forever I will be with the one who died for me. What a day, glorious day that will be. What a day that will be when my Jesus I shall see. When I look upon his face, the one who saved me by his grace, and takes me by the hand and leads me through the promised land. What a day, glorious day that will be.